excited about is how Firebase has been growing over the years, and I'm going to be talking about really what's new in Firebase. So just give me one moment to get it up and running.
Laurence, we're going to record you from here.
Sure. We're being recorded, so we have to behave. And if anybody wants pizza and anything, we're all very informal. Grab pizza, go to your seat, that kind of stuff, and we'll just have a little bit of fun with it. And I've lost my deck. Okay, I found it. Okay. And I just want to present with speaker notes. You know what I'm talking about? Go. All righty. So as Margaret said, my name is Laurence Moroney. I'm a developer advocate here at Google. I primarily work on Firebase. I also work a little bit on Google Maps and tinkering a little bit with stuff like TensorFlow as well. The role of a developer advocate is generally we try to be a two-way street between the community, which is all of you, and the engineers at Google who actually build the product. So my goal is that once we've built the product, to help disseminate what that product is all about, so you can understand how it is that and why it is that we built it the way that we have, but also to be an open ear to listen to feedback from you. Maybe you're not using Firebase and you want to use it, and there's some parts of it you don't understand. That's what we're here to help with. Maybe you've kicked the tires on it a little bit and there's some parts of it you didn't like. That's really what we're here to help with. And so, we're all about being a community. Firebase in particular, we love having developers come and having pizza and geek out over the technology. So please, feel free to ask anything. We got a whole bunch of Googlers here, and I want to give an extra special thanks to those folks who've taken their evening out to help out. So, please feel free to meet and greet. I'll just ask a quick show of hands from the Googlers in the room. All right, so we got a whole bunch of folks, so feel free to ask any questions about some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight. And if they're not familiar with Firebase, not all of us are, please come and ask me or any of the other Firebasers. There's also a whole bunch of sample copies of my book on the table over there beside the drinks. Feel free to grab 1 or 2 or 3 of them. These are the first 3 chapters of the full book. The full book has got about 15 chapters in it. At the time of writing, there were 15 technologies in Firebase, and it's like 1 chapter for each. So feel free. This one, it has an introduction, so how you can start to get up and running with Android Studio in Firebase, how you can do Firebase Off, which is one of my favorite technologies in Firebase, and also how you can just get started using the RealTime Database, which was really the heart and soul of where Firebase began. Okay, so what I want to talk about tonight is where we've started with Firebase, what's new in Firebase. We've added a whole bunch of stuff in the previous few months, and in particular, a couple of weeks ago, we had the Firebase Dev Summit in Amsterdam, and we had a whole bunch of new announcements at that of new technologies that are available in Firebase. So I'm going to be spending a little bit of time talking about them and maybe a little bit about the future of where we're going and the vision that we have for, to help you to build and operate great apps. So, as I've said, one of the things that is super important to us in Firebase is community. We wouldn't be where we are without a strong community of developers, and it's in our DNA to really work as closely as we can with the community through meetups, with GDGs, through various developer events, that kind of thing. It's interesting that I've done so many GDG events that I've spoken at around the world, and I'm actually based in this office, and this is my first one here, so shame on me. So, but we hope that we can give you value as a community, because we know we get value back from having you as a community working with us and building, on our stuff. So one of the things, how many of you have heard of Google? Okay, good. So you're all familiar with us. Some of the Googlers didn't put their hands up. So one of the things about Google is that our vision is really about building at global scale. When we build things, we really want to build things that scale to the billions. And part of the major investments that we've been putting into Firebase is to help you build products that scale to the billions as well. We have teams actually operating in over 130 countries, and that's including just about every country that you can think of. There's only one country I can name that we don't operate in, and I'm not going to say what that is. See if you can figure it out. And but by the fact that we work across all of that kind of scale, it's that we we really feel that we're able to bring in the diversity of needs of people around the world. The needs of a developer in Japan are very different from the needs of a developer in the US, or from South Africa, or from Canada, or from France, or from Ireland, or from any of these other countries. So part of what we're doing, not just in building products that run at global scale, is we try to do developer relations at global scale as well, because we feel that if we're listening at a global scale, then the products that we build will help you then roll out your apps or roll out your sites that will be able to reach these scales as well. So, we have representatives from all over the world, and maybe some people in this room who are, born in different places. I personally was born in the Middle East, although I probably don't sound like it. And, I just think it's great to embrace that kind of diversity that developers bring to us, and to try and expand that, to build a platform so that you can build for the diversity of people around the world. So some of the technologies that we work on, and some of the technologies that we've been focused on here. First of all is this one, Android. I'm sure, how many of you have heard of Android? So Android, we announced in Google I/O earlier this summer, is now actually running on over 2 billion active devices. And that number is growing incredibly quickly. We announced that 6 months ago. You can imagine where that number's at right now. And then there's the Google Cloud Platform. Cloud Platform is where we're bringing together like a variety of products, with the idea being that we want to reduce the amount of work that's needed to maintain and scale an active backend infrastructure. And Google Cloud Platform in particular has been designed with scale in mind. I can talk a little bit later, once we're done with the Firebase stuff, about a really interesting cloud platform project that I worked on, that we were able to put together and operate for a very, very low amount of money, that actually was able to handle the largest video streaming event of all time. So if you're interested in cloud platform and scalability, come talk to me and we can talk about that one a little bit. Then there's TensorFlow. How many have heard of TensorFlow? Oh, wow, quite a lot of you. So, we believe that the future is very much in machine learning and AI. And to that end, we've open sourced this platform called TensorFlow that will allow you to build ML-based products, AI-based products. I've recently been tinkering with it myself, and it's really cool. At the moment, in the Firebase team at Google, we're doing something called a Hack Week that we do a couple of times a year, where we're supposed to drop everything and build and hack on a project. So I've been building and hacking a project that links Firebase to TensorFlow, and having a lot of fun with it. And then, of course, the reason why we're here tonight is Firebase. And Firebase is our platform for you to be able to build mobile applications and mobile websites that operate at cloud scale. Okay, so some of the momentum, success, people tell us, is the only metric that matters. And as far as I'm concerned, it's your success is the metric that matters to me. And since we first released Firebase in summer of 2016, we now have over 1 million active developers working on Firebase. Now, usually when I make that statement, somebody goes, wait a second, you didn't release Firebase, you kind of purchased Firebase? Anybody thinking that? I see a few nods, okay. And that is true to an extent. So Firebase was a platform that had some of the elements in the current Firebase, the RealTime Database, some of the auth stuff and that kind of thing, that came about as a purchase that we made, I believe it was late 2014. At the same time, we were working on something that we call the Google Mobile Platform, with our vision being that we wanted to build a platform. We saw there was a gap in the market for a platform for mobile developers to have all of the back-end services that they need to succeed, and to be able to do that at cloud scale. So when Firebase joined the Google family, it was a natural fit for that. So then when we released Firebase, we released it as a number of different technologies. There's about, I think there's 17 technologies in it now, some of which was homegrown at Google, some of which came about as the acquisition, and we merged the Firebase team into our team. So our mission in Firebase is really twofold. Number one is to build better apps, and number two is to grow your business. So our goal to help you to do this is to give you the tools, to give you the technologies, to give you the platform that solves most of the issues in the app development lifecycle. The second part of this is to, well, some of the parts of this, sorry, is that part of this to be able to build better apps is to make it easier and quicker for you to develop things. So a couple of the technologies in Firebase that I'll just throw as an example are Firebase Auth and Cloud Storage. Firebase Auth, the goal behind that, and one of the chapters in the book is on it, is one of the main things that we see where application developers suffer a lot because they have to spend a lot of time building and growing and maintaining a security infrastructure if they have sign-in for their users. And we've all seen the stories of people having sign-in and having personal information, and it gets hacked and it gets leaked. And a small-scale application developer, a startup, the amount of calories that you have to burn in just building an infrastructure to maintain that is really, really onerous. And we've seen trends now that folks would rather just move towards a federated identity. So having sign in with Twitter or Facebook or GitHub or of course Google. So the idea behind Firebase Auth is we wanted to provide a single API that gives you all of that. And so again, the concept of building better apps, if you're, instead of building your own security infrastructure for maintaining your user credentials, you're able to just have an easy way that you can have people sign in with Google or username and password or those type of things. Then you're focusing your time on your application and on your business needs and on your users' needs instead of building all of that kind of stuff. And another one that we have, cloud storage, as I mentioned, is one thing that we see a lot of applications need is they need the ability to deal with files. Say you're building the next Instagram or you're building some kind of video app or something along those lines. At some point, you're going to be storing files on your user's behalf. And it's pretty easy to store files in the cloud. But where it becomes very difficult is doing that in a globally cached way so that they're quickly available to everybody. And having all of the code that you need to manage uploading and downloading of files and all the handshaking that needs to be done as a result of your app being mobile. Because a mobile app by definition is mobile, and as you move around between cell towers, it's easy to lose connectivity in the middle of an upload or a download, and there's a lot of code that you generally have to write for that kind of handshaking to manage that. And what cloud storage does is it's a back-end cloud storage scalable on our infrastructure, but also the API on top of that will allow you to not have to worry about writing all that code and maintaining all of that for yourself. So another theme that we have is really to understand how your app is doing. So we've got things, performance monitoring, so that you can actually see how your app is doing in the wild. And so when it's released out there and people all around the world are using your application, it's hard for you to look over their shoulders and see, how it's behaving in different countries, different networks, different languages, those kind of things kind of all have impact on your performance. So one of the things that we have is this performance monitoring tool, so you actually get a remote peek at how your application is performing in different places. And then of course analytics. And I'd say if there's only one part of Firebase that you use analytics. It's totally free. It's super easy to implement. It's not even one line of code. It's one line in your build.gradle if you're an Android user, and it's adding a pod file if you're an iOS user. And what analytics gives you is, just this beautiful insight on how people are using your application. And I'll show a little demo of it in a few moments. But it really gives you this great insight into how people are using your application, so you can see exactly where it's succeeding and where it's failing. And maybe if you've built a game, you can see how many people are getting past level 1, those type of things. And like I said, it's totally free of charge. Single line of code that you put into your application and you're done. And that gives you the basic set of analytics. There are other custom analytics that you can do for things that are specific to your app. And that's like a few lines of code, but it's pretty easy. And then the next part, the other part of the theme, is really helping you to grow and engage your users. And there's a bunch of technologies in Firebase around that. I'll call out a couple of them. One of them is remote config. Has anybody ever used remote config? 1, okay. 2, cool. Dave, you don't count. So remote config is, I think if I have a single favorite technology in Firebase, it's remote config, because it changes the way that you build your applications if you use it properly. How many of us have ever used a global variable in an app? Shameful hands going up. How about singleton? Okay, a few hands. Wow, so a lot of people here have never used a global variable or a singleton. You're much better programmers than me. So the idea behind remote config is if you have these kind of every application needs some kind of global variable. Maybe it's the one that I always like to use as an example is if you're building an e-commerce app, you'll offer a standard discount, right? So maybe your standard discount is 0%, but if you store that in some kind of variable that you can change, then whenever you want to do a special offer like 10% off everything, all you got to do is change that one variable and you're able to give 10% off across the board. But what happens when your app is in an app store, like the Play Store or the Apple App Store? Then if you want to change the value of that variable, maybe you store it in a database somewhere, but or you've got to roll out a new version of the application, those kind of things. The idea behind remote config is if you read that value from remote configuration, which is a key value store that's hosted in the cloud by Firebase, then you can update your application instantly to have this new standard discount without you needing to deploy a new version of the application or change a database. But where it gets really interesting is then you can then set the value of that variable based on your analytics audience. That's why I was saying it's really great for you to set up analytics in your application. Because if you set up analytics in your application, now you know which of your users are in the United States, which of your users are in Japan, which of your users are in Canada. And with remote configuration, you could say, let's give the Japanese a 15% discount, let's give the Canadians a 10% discount, let's give people in the US a 5% discount, and let's give people in the UK, will increase their price by 10%. You know, something like along those lines, you know, and that's all logic that you would put in your Firebase console, and you wouldn't have to change any of the code in your application. And then you can dynamically update your application and your application's behavior. So remote config, that's why it's one of my favorites. So I would say, if they only ever use one technology in Firebase, use analytics, because once you're using analytics, you light up all these other scenarios that you're able to take advantage of with other parts of Firebase, such as remote config or cloud messaging, which is the other icon that I put up here. And how many of you have heard of Firebase Cloud Messaging? Okay, cool, quite a few of you. So Firebase Cloud Messaging is an infrastructure for delivering messages to end users, and those messages can then be rendered as notifications on their devices. A year ago, we announced that we handle 1 trillion messages per week on Firebase Cloud Messaging, and 98% of these messages are received in 500 milliseconds or less. And for about 98% of messages are received in 500 milliseconds or less on connected devices. For disconnected devices, there's a retry mechanism. So once it's reconnected, there's a retry mechanism so those messages can be received. So it really, I've just been talking about how it operates at global scale, and you know, that to me is global scale. And I'm not allowed to share the figures that we have now, but it's a lot more than 1 trillion. We'll be talking about that in a few weeks' time. You know, we'll be making some announcements of where we're going with that. And you know, if you think about Moore's law, we're beating it. So it's, you know, things like that. It's, you know, massively scalable infrastructure. But the other thing about messages when you're going to deliver them to users is not only do you need them to be fast and reliable, you know, you also want to avoid the thing that everybody loves, and that's notification spam. Who likes notification spam? Oh, good, no hands. So then the idea is with cloud messaging is like you can design how your messages get delivered. So I've been geeking out about analytics. That's again another reason to use analytics, because you might define in your analytics, you might find an audience of people who are likely to receive messages favorably, and then you could deliver to them. Or, for example, if you have an international application, you know, your users in Japan, you don't want to send them a notification in English, and your users in the US, you don't want to send them a notification in Japanese. Generally, users don't like that. So using analytics, you can, again, pick your audience and direct your messages to in the right way. So as to avoid the type of messages that people don't want to receive. So things like that, cloud messaging is really, really powerful for that. So this is the array of technologies that are in Firebase as of right now. So the left-hand side are the ones that we use, you know, we talk about really for you to build better apps, they're for developers for developing. We actually have a couple of new ones that have been added to this since this slide was done on the growth side, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. But just a quick summary, RealTime Database is, as it sounds, it's a real-time database. It's a JSON-based key value store. And the idea behind this is that what I really like about the real-time database is that if you want to have a cloud-based database, you can do it without having an end-tier architecture. So all of your code for accessing the real-time database is in your app. You don't need to worry about writing code and stored procedures and SQL and all that kind of stuff that run on a server. Everything is in your app. So it makes it very, very easy for you to have a single code base for all of your data and for managing your database. Authentication I mentioned, and cloud storage I mentioned earlier. Test Lab is a really interesting one that, has anybody got a Pixel 2 XL? Can I borrow it like for 6 months? But I'm working on an app and I don't have a Pixel 2 XL to test it on, so please? No, okay. So it's a common issue that Android, there are lots of devices out there and there are new devices being added all the time. And if you're working on an app, what do? Do you buy one of every device, or do you borrow his Pixel for 6 months? No. And so one of the nice things about Test Lab is that we've built a test center containing either physical or virtual implementations of Android devices. You upload your APK to that, you upload a test script to it. We also have RoboTest that will run on it, and it will test your application for you to see how it behaves in those environments. And it's very common. I found, like, I work with a lot of application developers in India and in China, And what they've had to do in the past was to send somebody to the US to get an Amazon account, to shop on Amazon, to buy a bunch of devices and then take them home for testing. And then, of course, we build a whole new set of devices. So, the idea behind Test Lab is to really take the complexity out of that. We host in our data center all of these images. You can upload and you can use them. It's one of the few parts of Firebase that isn't completely free. There are some basic tests that you can do for free, but once you start getting into using lots of devices, there are some charges for that. But it's really, really handy, very, very useful if you want to see how your device or how your app is going to operate on different devices. Firebase hosting is a really neat little technology. I'll show a demo first. I do have a slide about it later, but let me show a demo first. See if I can get this to work on the projector. Okay, so I have a hobby. Put it on this one. Let's see. Nope. Okay, so I have a hobby that when I'm not Googling, I love to do 3D art, and I do rendering of CGI characters. And the tool that I use, the biggest image that I can render with that is 10,000 by 10,000 pixels. So that's 100 million pixels. So I've uploaded an image to Firebase storage, and to Firebase hosting, and this image is going to be a 100 million pixel image. So we're on a shared Wi-Fi here. How long do you think it would take to download a 100 million pixel image? I know it's a Google shared Wi-Fi, but it's still shared Wi-Fi. Minute? Who thinks more than a minute? Okay, more than 5 minutes? More than 10 minutes? Okay, less than 1 minute? Okay, well let's give it a try, shall we? So I posted it here, and boom, there it is. Okay, so that took less than a second, and I'm not caching it. So the idea, I'm cheating a little bit. So first, one of the things you'll notice that if you look at the URL, it's actually HTTPS. So it offers secure socket layer. And just to prove that this is a 100 megapixel image, if I zoom in on her eye, you'll see the detail, and you'll even see what was behind the camera reflected in her eye, as the image is being reviewed. If you imagine it's set up in a virtual room and there's a camera, and then there are objects behind the camera, and light bounces off those objects and into her eyes, so you can see things like that. You can see that kind of detail. So I cheated a little bit here, but I just did it to show the power of Firebase hosting. So this is a 100 megapixel image, but it's using something called OpenSea Dragon. Has anybody heard of OpenSea Dragon? Anybody remember technology called Deep Zoom? Me, you remember that one, right? So the idea behind OpenSea Dragon is this open source implementation. It started in Microsoft Research, but what it allows you to do is to get a big image and slice it into tiles at different zoom levels, a lot like Google Maps. So if when you see a map of the Earth, you're obviously not downloading every tile, but then as soon as you zoom into street level, you're seeing more detailed tiles. One question?
Yes. Is it like mid-mapping?
Is it like
mid-mapping?
Mid-mapping? I think so, yes. I think so. But so the idea is that it cuts your image into a pyramid effectively at different zoom levels. So it's a JavaScript-based thing. So I hosted the JavaScript in Firebase hosting, and I sliced the image up and I put it in there. And this is a live image now hosted on Firebase hosting. If I zoom out, even some things like when you build a model like this, the skin is photographed from a real person, and this person, when her photograph was being taken, had dirt under her fingernails. I don't know how well you can see that in the light. You can see it right here. So, just this to me shows some of the power of Firebase hosting. It's totally free of charge. You use it for hosting static files. So if you're doing things like, single page web applications, that kind of thing, you can put them in here. But to me, the most powerful and interesting part of it is you can do SSL. And it's really easy to do SSL. If you've ever tried to do an SSL on a third-party provider, it can be really gnarly. But with this one, it just comes along for the ride. And so that's Firebase hosting. Cloud Functions is a relatively new release. It went into beta earlier this year. But the idea behind Cloud Functions is if you think about an event that happens in Firebase, like something being written to a database or an auth event happening, somebody has just signed up, or an analytics event happening, there's a conversion. You can write Node.js code that runs on our servers on your behalf, and that will execute in response to those things that we call triggers. The idea being that you can have a serverless architecture. So you just write the code and you deploy it into Firebase, and you don't think about which server it's running on. You don't think about managing servers or deploying them. You just worry about your code, and you write your code and you deploy it. That's what Functions is all about. Crash reporting is, as the name suggests, it's all about crash reporting. We also have something called Crashlytics, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But the idea is that, as people are using your app in the field, when something goes wrong and they get a crash, that's the #1 thing that will turn them off using your application and get you 1-star reviews. And so if you can find and fix those crashes quickly and remotely, that's what this technology is all about. What it effectively gives you is a stack dump of what caused the crash. And then you can also, as I've been talking about analytics, you can use analytics to then divide these stack dumps into different audiences, and you realize, hey, people in Japan are seeing this crash far more often than people in the United States, and then that helps you to debug the application. And maybe it's something to do with devices in Japan or Japanese fonts or something like that. Grow applications, I'll just go through them quickly. Analytics, I mentioned. Dynamic links and invites, as their name suggests, are there for, it's a drop-in tool that will allow, you've all seen applications where you can do a referral. So if you want to, refer your friends to use this application, they do that. One of the neat things about dynamic links is that at Google, we're working really, really hard on building AI and machine learning into everything that we do. Sorry, into invites. So when you see, if you do a demo, if you use an application that uses Firebase invites, the average person has 300 people in their contact list. And instead of that contact list starting with A and then going to B, what it does is we've got some AI in the back end that's saying, these are the people that this person converses with frequently. These are the people who are most likely to receive this favorably, those type of things. And you'll see that you'll get suggested contacts at the top of the list just to reduce some of that friction of sharing the application. Instead of your end user needing to fish through their 300 contacts, the person that's most likely, because of the person they converse with mostly, will appear at the top of the list, that type of thing. Cloud messaging, remote config, I mentioned already. And app indexing, I'll just say is, has anybody ever used app indexing? Nobody's heard of it? This is one of my favorite technologies in Firebase. How many of you use the Google search engine on your mobile device? Okay. How many of you think your users are using the Google search engine on their mobile device? Right? So the idea is that something that we all do daily, whether it's on an Android device or an iOS device, is to use the Google search engine. And the idea behind app indexing is that if you have content in your app that you also have on the web, then the idea is as the Google search engine crawls that content, you can actually connect it with your app. So then as users are searching for that type of content, if your app has that content, then it will help them to re-engage with your app. So many apps are installed once and then forgotten about. And if that's your app and you've spent all that time developing it, and you've spent all that time marketing it, and it's sitting there on your phone forgotten, then as people are searching the Google search engine, that's what app index is all about. That say you've built an app, I don't know, for baseball scores, and if people are searching for baseball scores, instead of them getting a random website with baseball scores, they've already invested in your app on their device, which sends a signal that says they want baseball scores from your app. And as a result, the search engine will surface your app as a way of seeing those results. So it's pretty cool stuff. All right, so with Firebase, when I did the demo, I lost my notes. So with Firebase, we're also cross-platform. So primarily, from mobile devices, I've been talking about iOS and Android. Of course, we're on the web too. Not all of the products in Firebase work on the web yet. Things like remote config are mobile only. And recently, then we've also been investing in native applications, so C++ and Unity for games developers. So we're continuing to grow the platform across all of these. And a lot of the SDKs for Firebase, we've actually open sourced. So if you feel that you want to contribute to the SDKs and contribute back to the community, particularly if you're an expert in any of these areas, it's open source and it's there for you to work with. Okay, so as I've been mentioning, it's like, our focus for developers has been on back-end services so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, first of all. And secondly, you can take advantage of the scale that I spoke about earlier on and the diversity that we've been designing our platform to address. So to talk about some of these things and to talk about some of the updates, one of the first big updates is Fabric. So we acquired Fabric earlier this year from Twitter, and Fabric brought with it two things. Number one is phone authentication, and number two is something called Crashlytics. Any Fabric users here? Okay, a couple. Nice. So, since the Fabric launched Crashlytics in 2011, and I have to admit it impressed the socks off me when I started using it. And we've been working on merging it with what we've been doing on crash reporting. So the whole idea behind Crashlytics is similar to what I mentioned when we have a crash reporting, is that a remote way for you to see a stack trace of when something goes wrong in a user's application. So we're still working hard together to bring the best of both platforms together. If you've used the Firebase console recently, some of the design language of the Crashlytics console has worked its way into the Firebase console, and we're continuing that level of integration. But one of the first things that we've done is with Firebase authentication, is the #1 request that we had was for phone number authentication. More and more people are using phone numbers to sign into their device, which makes perfect sense. It's unique to that device, when you have a SIM in the device, or an active SIM in the device. So instead of you needing to provide an identity via like a username and password or Facebook or Twitter, you have a unique identity already on that device. You should be able to sign in with it. So it was one of the things that we saw was a gap in Firebase authentication. So as part of the acquisition of Fabric, we've been building the phone authentication with them. And we released that earlier this year at I/O. So there's a whole bunch of information out there. There's a bunch of materials out there on how to do it. It's super easy to do though. And it's fully integrated into Firebase. So now phone number-based users can have full security profiles within Firebase. So one of the neat things as well with it is that auto verification of SMS messages, which is a feature of Android, has been built into it as well. So that you know what it's like if you sign up with a phone number. Usually they will send an SMS to you with a code in it. Like if you use like Uber and Lyft and most applications will do that. And then you've got to go somewhere to type in that code to verify that you actually own that device. One of the services in Android actually does all of that automatically. And so that's one of the things, so like for Android users and phone off, we have that there. Doesn't work in iOS, but iOS users will still get the flow of receiving an SMS and they can type in a message. And one of the nice things if you're using Firebase for phone off is that the actual design of user flows comes with years and years of research that we've done in user flows and in understanding what works and what doesn't work for users. Like one example I always like to give is, did you know that every time you present an additional screen to a user to be able to sign up to use your application, you lose 50% of them, right? So think about all that marketing budgets, marketing effort that you've spent on getting users to come to your platform. And if you provide them 5 screens instead of 4, you're losing 50% of what you shouldn't have been losing, that type of thing. So as a result, we've been working really, really hard to build a UX, and we've open sourced that as something called Firebase UI. And so the user experience around good authentication is in Firebase UI. So if you want to do phone off, it's there for you to use. Okay, so Cloud Functions, I mentioned earlier on. One of the things that we heard most from developers when we first released Firebase was, this is all very well. We love being able to do database logic in the client, having a single code base like on Android. So our Android developers will work in Java or Kotlin for our database stuff. Our iOS developers will work in Objective-C or Swift for the database stuff. We don't need to worry about having SQL developers and building all that infrastructure. Very, very nice, but we always need some code that executes on the back end, because there's some code that we do not want to deploy to the client. And we heard that, and we understood that people really want that, and we worked really hard to deliver that in a serverless way. So there were options that you could use something like App Engine, or you could build something on AWS or Windows Azure, or any of those things to be able to have a backend service, but you're still managing infrastructure to some level when you're doing that. So the idea is to be purely serverless. We delivered Cloud Functions. So Cloud Functions for Firebase is this really neat thing, as I mentioned earlier on, that the idea is that if you have an event happening, like a database read or a database write or a change to an update to a database, typical CRUD stuff, or an analytics event or an auth event, or any of those kind of things happening, you can write Node.js code in response to that, to handle that event, to handle that trigger, to be triggered by that event, and then execute some code to actually do something. So let me give one example. If you are building an application, a chat type application, people like to send text to each other in chats, and people like to send pictures to each other in chats. But you don't want inappropriate pictures to be delivered across your framework. What do? Right? It's a lot of work once somebody has sent a picture for, you would then have that picture put into your storage, and then you would somehow need to figure out what to do with that picture to figure out if it's good or not before you then deliver that to the end users in the chat room, beyond the person who actually sent it. So that's the idea of where Cloud Functions comes in. So with cloud storage, when something is written to cloud storage, that causes a trigger, and then you'd write code in response to that trigger. So if your user uploads an image, that would trigger a Cloud Function to execute. The Cloud Function can see what that image is. With Google, we've got something called Safe Search. So there's a Safe Search API that you would pass that image to. The Safe Search API would return metadata about that image. And if the metadata in that image matches things that you don't want to be able to deliver, inappropriate things, violence or various other inappropriate things, you could then replace that image with something else, right? An image of a puppy or something, who knows? And so it's, the actual amount of work that you would typically need to do that is really onerous. So the idea behind Cloud Functions for Firebase is to make that type of workflow much easier. Okay, so excuse me. So yeah, this is storage, to be able to do it with that. And Cloud Functions, one of the neat things about it, as well as some of the APIs in that are for cloud messaging. So you can even send cloud messaging from within Cloud Functions. So for example, if a new user signs up and maybe they sign up and they sign into a particular chat room in your chat application, you could send a notification to everybody else who's subscribed to that chat room or who's interested in that topic. Those type of things, just again, to try and make building applications a lot easier. Functions also work with hosting. So I showed hosting earlier on with my little demo of the graphic. But one of the nice things is that you can also write functions that respond to particular URLs being called. So you can actually build smart servers, using this. And there's a company out there, I haven't had a look at it yet, but apparently there's a company out there who built a simple CMS using Firebase and using Cloud Functions for Firebase. The whole idea is to give you that serverless development. And as I mentioned before with hosting, it's HTTPS and it's at global scale and it's free. So I find it particularly interesting. So some of the next things, and one of the recent things that's new in Firebase is for data, is that one of the things that we've heard a lot about is that people use the Firebase RealTime Database, but it's kind of difficult to query data in it because it's a very flat structure. And so a lot of developers have come to us and, like me, I've come from a SQL Server type background and a MySQL type background. So I'm used to thinking about data in tables and joins and indexes and queries and all that kind of thing. So it was a bit of a round peg into a square hole when I started using Firebase for the first time with a flat JSON style structure. Once you start doing that, it's pretty cool and you can be very efficient with doing it. But if you want more of a hierarchical data structure, that's the idea behind Cloud Firestore. So the idea behind Cloud Firestore that we've released it is as a document-based store. So the idea is that you can create, if you think about if you represent a piece of data as a POJO, like a plain old Java object, you've got properties on that object. Those objects can be sorted, gathered into collections, those collections into collections, etc. And it kind of works like that. So it's document-based, where a document can define a piece of data. So for example, I don't know, you're building a financial services application and people have holdings of stock, right? So Google stock, you bought 300 of them. I wish I could buy 300 of them. You bought 300 of them at a particular price on a particular date. Those are the pieces of data behind that holding. And then you have a whole bunch of holdings that go within your portfolio. And then you may have multiple portfolios. That's the idea. Like if you think about each of those holdings as a document, each of those portfolios is a collection. And then you can have multiple portfolios being your overall investment. And then your investment is also a collection. So that's the kind of hierarchical data that Cloud Firestore is built upon. And the neat thing about that is if you want to start querying across the data, instead of reading the entire file structure and trying to filter through it, what Firestore will allow you to do is like say, show me all portfolios containing Google stock, and through a ladder like this one. So the idea is also when using the SDKs that you get replication in the same way as the real-time database, you get replication across all devices. We live in a multi-device world. Many of us have more than one phone. Many of us may have a tablet as well as a phone. Many of us may also have IoT devices or wearable devices as well as these. And you want to have your data replicated across these where it makes sense. So the idea is that once you're using Cloud Firestore or the real-time database, your data gets replicated across all of your devices automatically. So it's pretty neat like that. And it also works in disconnected fashion. So if I say, for example, if I think about the chat room scenario that I was talking about earlier, maybe I'm chatting with my best friend in China and he goes into a tunnel and I keep chatting and I keep sending messages to him. He's not receiving them while he's in the tunnel. He comes out of the tunnel. What happens? He then receives all of my messages straight away. Okay, that's great, but I was not the one disconnected. He was the one disconnected. So what happens to the messages that he sent to me? Well, in that case, what happened? Well, he's in the tunnel and he's disconnected. If he's typing messages to me, they're getting stored in his local cache of the database so that once he leaves the tunnel and he gets reconnected, they get synchronized back to me, so I'm able to receive them. So we have that kind of disconnected functionality within Firebase. It's in the real-time database, and it's also in the new Firestore. And funny story, by the way, when we first released Firestore, some people on Twitter got confused and they thought Google were doing something with Firestone, the people who make tires. So it's maybe we need to work on our naming a little bit. So because R's look like N's sometimes in some fonts. So, and of course, part of the theme of Firebase is that Firestore is integrated across the entire platform in the same way as everything else. So for example, if you're using Firebase Authentication, then security profiles from Firebase Authentication can be used with Firestore. If you're using Cloud Functions, then events in Firestore can be triggered. And of course, my favorite that I keep talking about, analytics, you can start thinking about how you'd use analytics with Firestore users too. So, and then finally, when it comes to scaling, the idea is that it auto scales with you. So the worst thing in the world is when you plan for capacity here, and then your users are here and you haven't built for that capacity. Or if you plan for capacity here and your users are here and you're paying for all of this capacity when you're only using this much. So the idea behind Firebase is this scalable capacity, it's cloud-based, and Firestore is the same. So you only, in anything scalable, you only pay for what you use. And in Firestore and in most of Firebase, we actually have a free tier, so you don't need to worry about payment. But if you do grow to the point where you have that massive scale, you have that massive amount of users, then you're able to upgrade to a payment plan, but the infrastructure will scale according to your use. And that's not just scaling up to your use, it's also scaling right back down again so that you only pay for what you're actually using. Okay, so those are some of the new things that we've been working on for people for building your apps. So some of the things now for app quality. So when you want to improve your application, the important thing is understanding how people are using it. So we have made some improvements to the console to help you navigate through the various offerings that are in there. But one of the things that I really prefer to talk about is that the worst thing is that when people have a bad experience with your app, that reflects badly on you. And then many people will give you a negative review. And we actually did some research on this, and we found that over 50% of one-star reviews in the Play Store mention one of these three words. Oh, I'm going to hyphenate one of them. It mentions crashes, mentions bugs, or it mentions slow performance. So over 50% mention those three phrases. So it's like, we can't fix your crashes for you. We can't help you write bug-free code, and we can't help you write code that is faster. That's down to you. But we can help you detect when these things happen. And that's what the tools are all about. Crash reporting and Crashlytics I mentioned earlier on. If people are getting crashes in your application, if you're having thousands of crashes all over the world, you're not just going to pick the first one on the stack and fix that. You want to be able to slice and dice them to figure out which ones have the biggest impact so you can fix those first. That's what those tools are all about. Bugs, of course, the Stack Overflow is a website. You heard of it? Yeah. So the stack trace will then help you trace exactly why your bug is failing. And one that I really like, the example that I've had personally happen to me was that last year I was doing a talk in Korea, and I was building an application. I built this app for like this, it's like a augmented reality game that uses Firebase and uses some Google Maps. And it works great here, and I did some testing here. And then you interact with this virtual character, and she speaks English. And so I thought, I really want to wow the audience in Korea that I'm going to redub the character's lines in Korean. And we had like a Korean person speak the lines, and we redubbed the animated character stuff in Korean. And I built the application and I tested it, and it worked great. And I shipped the APK over to some Googlers in Korea, asked them to put it on the device. They all failed. Every single one crashed. And it was like, how do I debug that? How do I fix that? And I didn't have their devices. I didn't know, I tried everything that I could think of, but then using something like crash reporting, I was able to see through a stack trace that, the fonts that they were using in Korean weren't rendering properly, and that was causing a stack overflow, and it caused the application to crash. It was nothing to do with me, but at least I was able to see in my code how I could get around that and fix that before I had to get on a plane to Korea. So, little things like that are really, really cool. And then beyond finding and fixing issues then is discovering application performance. So Firebase Performance is something that we released this year to that end. So the idea, again, behind this one is that, things like app start time, network latency, these kind of data, they differ wildly, not just in your country, but also all over the world. So being able to see that and to see which parts of this, like maybe your app start time is 1 second in the US, but it's 30 seconds in Japan. And why? Trying to figure out why. And first of all, knowing that that's the case, so you don't get a slew of 1-star reviews from Japan is great. And then once you know that that's what's happening, being able to use things like crash reporting and those kind of stack traces to see what's going on in your application, and perfmon to be able to see what's going on in your application, is something that will help you improve your quality of your app over time. And again, there's filtering that goes on in this. It's not just this big, dumb Stack Overflow of everything. Things like app version, the operating system, the version of Android, the country, all those kind of things you can actually filter out so that you can see what's going on and, find problematic areas so you can fix your app. Okay, some of the traction that we've had from this is that we've found that, since we released perfmon, it's being used by several thousand developers, but over 200 million app installs are taking advantage of this. And the number of app events per day that we're processing is about 30 billion. And we're constantly using this to improve the platform. So we think we can handle the scale, and we hope that that's something that you'll be able to use to build better apps. So as I mentioned earlier on, and I mentioned at length, performance is one thing, but I think personally, the best way to improve your user experience is to eliminate crashes. There's nothing worse for a user than searching for an app in the Play Store, finding that app in the Play Store, touching on that app to install it, having to sign in, maybe having to pay, waiting for the installation to begin. Then the installation starts and it keeps going. And then for me, the most annoying part is the installation reaches 100% and then stays there for 2 minutes before you can actually launch the app. And then I finally get the app icon and then I can launch it only for it to crash. How many of you experienced that? Okay. Isn't it really annoying? And then how many of you have given a 1-star review to the app because of that? Okay, you're nicer than me. So it's like, to me, it's like once that happens, it can really kill your reputation. And all it takes is 1 or 2 bad reviews for your app, then for the next user to come to the Play Store and they see, I spent 15 minutes downloading this. Or worse, I live in a country where I pay for my bandwidth. I don't have an unlimited plan and I pay for my bandwidth. So I spent $3 to buy the app and I spent $2 on bandwidth to download it. The dang thing crashed and I couldn't use it. And when people start seeing those reviews, and I don't know if you're like me, but before I ever install an app, the first thing I read are the reviews. And all it takes is 1 or 2 of them and your business could be ruined. So that's why we've been working really hard on crash reporting and Crashlytics that I've mentioned. Is the idea is to turn the chaos into order. So all these chaos of these crashes, they are going to happen. So if you find them and fix them quickly, then you can start getting order and then you can start losing those 1-star reviews. So that's the whole idea that we've been working behind this. We really trying to build all of these services for building a better app and for building quality apps so that you can stop focusing on the infrastructure and you can start focusing on your business requirements and on your users' requirements and being able to build new app features. Many of us work in startups. I've come from the startup space, and it's like we have very few developers, and every calorie that we burn on building infrastructure is a calorie we're not burning on building something that's distinctive to our application. So the goal for me as a Firebaser is to help you burn those calories in the right way. Okay, so Crashlytics I mentioned, I won't go into it again. And functions is one of the things that we've recently integrated. So if you try this, you'll actually be able to see that critical issues can cause a trigger, so Firebase functions can do something. Maybe just something as simple as sending a notification that says, sorry about the crash. But it could be, it's really up to you how you'd use that. So one of the newest things that we've done is integrate functions into it. I have to ask a question for everybody here that I've been having a little bit of a debate with our marketing people about the functions icon, this one right here. I think it looks like a puppy. Do you see it? It's like this is the nose, and these are the eyes, and these are the ears. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And now it's like, whenever I talk to people about functions, I keep hearing it's a puppy. So it's like, it is just like a puppy. It's cuddly and it's loyal and it's loving and those kind of things. But You know, I do wish they picked a better icon. Anyway, moving on. So let's see. Let me go on to, okay, growing and engaging more users. So we were talking a lot about the services for app development, talking a lot about the services for app quality. But one of the important trends that we've been seeing in 2017, and one that we're investing heavily in, is helping you be growth hackers in the same way as you're helping you be app developers. You know, not every startup can afford to have a division or a group, you know, designed just for growing and marketing your application. You know, so we want to be able to give you tools that will help you to grow and engage your users. So some of the things, Firebase Cloud Messaging, to that end, I mentioned it earlier on, it's all about being able to deliver notifications. Notifications are very powerful for growing your audience. Notifications are really powerful for retaining your audience, and notifications are really powerful for turning off your audience. So we want to make sure that we have a set of tools and platforms that cross all of these three and help you do the first two without doing the third of these. So one of the things that we've just been, so notifications that I mentioned before, you know, works really well on iOS and Android. We also have a web platform for notifications. One of the things that we've added recently was to have a simple API that works across both iOS and Android, because notifications kind of work a little bit differently in both of them. And we just announced a couple of weeks ago this RESTful API that you can use that allows you to target both of them instead of having, you know, two different code sets. So that's one of the newest things. Remote config, I mentioned earlier on, I spoke at length about it earlier on, but we've been making some additions to remote config that we announced just a couple of weeks ago. But remote config, as I mentioned, you know, one of the things that allows you to store server-side variables that your application can read at runtime, and that can be used for something like A/B testing, right? So you can see here, like, you know, if you want to do an A/B test, so that one group of people get a red OK button, another group of people get a blue OK button, and then you can measure the analytics in response to that. It's pretty powerful. But we've actually been learning from end users that it's not powerful enough, and we want to be able to do real A/B testing. And real A/B testing isn't just A/B; it can be multivariant, and it also needs to be work against a control group. So, for example, if I have 10,000 users, I could say 2,000 of my users I'm not going to change anything, and then for the other 8,000, let me split the other 8,000 into 4 groups. And for those 4 groups, I'm going to give value A, value B, value C, value D, and then I want to be able to measure all the results of these. And so instead of you having to do that manually by inspecting analytics, one of the things that we announced just a couple of weeks ago is this Firebase A/B testing. So it integrates a remote config in that way. So you can then set up the differences, the variants that you want in your application as remote config variables, and then set up an experiment in A/B testing, and during the course of that experiment, Firebase will pick the audiences for you. It can pick them at random, or it can pick them based on your analytics criteria, and then it will deliver to those audiences those values during the period of that experiment and measure the effectiveness of that. So it's it's designed really for true multivariant A/B testing. It's completely free of charge, and it integrates really neatly with Firebase Remote Config. So I think it's something that's well worth investigating and well worth taking a look at. And you can also run A/B tests with your FCM push notifications. So this, again, this is something new that we just announced a couple of weeks ago. But the idea is, I've been talking about one of the worst things in the world you can do is send notifications to people who don't want them. But you don't always know that until you can test it. So you can actually do a test of different notifications to different audiences. Maybe you could, I don't know, if your application, you could say, hey, come back and try new levels in one notification, or you could say, get free swag when you come back and try new levels in another notification, and then pass that through A/B testing, and A/B testing will measure which of those are the most efficient. My guess that the last one that's offering free stuff will be the most efficient, but the idea behind A/B testing is to turn I guess or I think into I know, by actually measuring the wisdom of your users. And so it's a really powerful tool, really cool, and I personally like it. But my personal favorite, and the one that I've been working hard on for the last couple of months, is I've been geeking out all night about analytics. And analytics are really nice for you to be able to tell what people have done in your application. But wouldn't it be even better if you could reasonably predict what people will do in your application? And that's what Firebase Predictions is all about. So with Firebase Predictions, we've used our own ML and AI technology, our own TensorFlow technology, And what we've done with this is that for your application, the analytics behavior of your users is fed into a machine learned model. And from that, we'll provide 4 predictions out of the box. Prediction number 1 is that user will churn. And by churning, I mean that user will stop using your app in the next 7 days. We can't tell if they're going to uninstall your app, but the odds are pretty good if they stop using your app that they will uninstall it. You don't want that to happen. Prediction number 2 is that this user will not churn in the next 7 days, with a reasonable level of certainty. Prediction number 3 is that the user will spend something in your application if you have in-app purchases. And prediction number 4 is that your user will not spend something, using in-app purchases. So what predictions will do is every 24 hours, it will segregate these groups and it will create a user group of people who meet these criteria. So it'll give you a user group of people that's updated every 24 hours, for example, that are going to churn out of your application. So if you realize, and it will tell you, hey, look, we're predicting that 35% of your people are going to churn in the next 7 days, you probably want to do something about that, to prevent them churning, to prevent them stopping using your application, such as maybe giving them a discount via remote config if it's a e-commerce application, or giving them free lives if it's a game, or something along those lines that will help you continue to retain those users. Ditto, for example, if people are going to be predicted that they're going to spend something, you might want to give them a little discount so that they spend even more. Or if you're predicting that people are not going to spend something, then you might want to give them something to entice them to actually spend. So those 4 predictions come out of the box with Firebase Predictions. But you can also define your own predictions. So the idea behind this is that if you have conversion events in analytics, so the idea is behind conversion events is that you can instrument almost everything that works in your application. And let me give an example of a game. Maybe you define an analytic for here's everybody that beat level 1, here's everybody that beat level 2, here's everybody that beat level 3. And once somebody beats level 3, you realize that they're going to play the rest of your game. People who play level 1 may not play the rest. People who play level 2 may not play the rest. But once they pass level 3, they're going to play the rest of your game. You call that a conversion event. So you can flag that as something called a conversion event. And then you can build a prediction for people who are going to meet that conversion event. And what Firebase Predictions will do is it will give you that group of users that are going to either meet that conversion event or not meet that conversion event with a level of statistic probability. So you could do something to address those users, either with notifications or remote config or something like that. I find it's pretty cool. And it's called Firebase Predictions, and it's got this lovely little magic wand icon that doesn't look like a puppy. Okay, so like I said, so it gives you input from analytics, and then the output from that you can use, for example, to send cloud messages to people. You can use to set up remote config variables to people, or you can even do an A/B test. So you can say, here's my group of people who are going to churn. Let me do an A/B test on this group of people. I think they're going to churn because of X, but let me set up all these tests, do an A/B test, and get even more intelligence about why my users are likely to churn. So that's Firebase Predictions. This is what it looks like in the console. So it's a little bit blurry here, but this one on the top left is like, in this particular application, 39% of the app's user base were predicted to churn, within 7 days. And that's pretty bad. Okay, so there's a button there that then says target users. So you can directly from the console click on that button and set up a messaging campaign or set up a remote config variable or something like that to be able to reach those users. This is not churn, 57% were not churning. Now I always get the question, why don't they add up to 100? Right, the users who are churning and the users are not churning, because there are always going to be users, it's a prediction, who are in an indeterminate state that we don't know if they're going to churn or not churn, right? So, it's very rare for those two numbers to add up to 100. And to give an example of one company that was an early adopter of this is Halfbrick. And Halfbrick make a lot of games. And they decided to use predictions. Before we released it, they were an early adopter with us, helping us test it out in one of their games. And they saw that when they presented this dialogue to people who were falling within the predicted audience of churning, they presented this dialogue that said, hey, we're going to give you a gift of 25 tokens, 2,000 gold. They actually saw a 20% increase in their 7-day user retention. So right out of the box, it worked for them. And so I think it's pretty cool. We have a whole bunch of stuff that we're working on for predictions. There's some videos on YouTube. There's a blog post went out last week. I'm working on a tutorial for raywenderlich.com if you use that site, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So, thoroughly recommend that you take a look at it. But as I said right back at the beginning of the talk, begin everything with analytics, because if you use analytics, it starts lighting up all these scenarios. Okay, so with that, I just want to say thank you very much. It's at Firebase, we're really hoping to be able to work with you to enable you and empower you to build the best possible apps that you can. We do have an alpha program, so this is the firebase.google.com/alpha. So if you want to go there and sign up, then some new announcements and new products, things like Halfbrick that I mentioned, they came in through that alpha program when they were building that game. So, just go to this link if you're interested in participating. We'd love to hear from you. So, just a couple of moments on the future of Firebase, where we're going. So, Firestore is something that we announced in beta. Obviously, we want to move that from beta to RTM. Crashlytics is something that we're continuing to integrate. A lot of the functions of Crashlytics we want to be able to build into Firebase. A/B testing that I've mentioned is presently in beta. We're continuing to work on that. We want to add more features. Would love you to kick the tires with it and to try it out and to let us know what we need to do. And Firebase Predictions, 4 predictions out of the box right now: churn, not churn, spend, not spend. The ability to build predictions based on your own conversion analytics. But we'd love to hear feedback from you about what kind of things you would like in predictions. We're really excited about this. We're continuing to build it out. We think, it's going to be something that can really help you. So with that, just want to say we've been working hard to make a lot of progress. We hope that it's something that you'll be able to take advantage of. And thanks for coming and spending this Wednesday night with me. And I can take some questions. Yep, over here.
The last topic you mentioned about the prediction.
Yeah.
Could you please elaborate a little bit more on how you come up with the predictions? Is it based on the user behavior for the application itself, or the application itself in addition to other applications that is already hosted by Firebase?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we train the model, we are not training it on any data other than your own data for that application. So other people's usage of other applications will not factor into your model. Your data is entirely private to you and to your application. We have built the underlying neural network based on the behavior of people using our apps, things like Gmail and the various Google apps that are out there. That was used to help us train the initial model. But then that model will continually be retrained by your users using your application only. And if you have multiple applications, it's only users of app A will get predictions from the model of app A, only users of app B will get it for app B, that kind of thing. So we don't cross-pollinate in any way. So, yeah.
Explain the underlying model a little bit at what grain is it in visual grain or
so,
is that segmentation?
Not sure I understand the question, sorry.
You just mentioned that for the Google Analytics, there is an underlying model.
Right.
And then on top of that, there is a model that customizes the prediction for specific application. I'd like to know about that.
Okay. So I'll take, for example, the churn statistics. So we have a bunch of apps that are ours that we've built, and we've done a lot of learning about what it is in those apps that causes users to churn. Is it bugs in the app? Is it features that are missing? Is it, any of those kind of analytics? Is it performance? All that kind of stuff. Is it difficulty of moving from screen to screen? Is it sign-up progress? All that kind of thing that we've used to build a basic model of understanding what it takes, what causes a user to churn. So then that provides you the template model. So now you build an application and you release an application in the wild, and you get a number of users using your application. I think it's about 10,000 users is when it starts getting statistically relevant. So then what we'll start doing at that point is looking at your analytics. Within your analytics data set, what is it that causes a user to churn?
There are some trends that you found already and you met.
Correct. So there's the underlying intelligence to begin with, but the most important thing is the intelligence of your application. So it's not starting from zero. So There was a question over here. Yeah.
Yeah, a question about mix of off and offline. How long can the user be offline if they're logged into the application full time?
So,
Saving data and we're saving data.
so if the user is signed in and then they're writing data in an offline state, how long will they continue to do that? Is that the question? I believe it's indefinitely. So.
Yeah, it should
Yeah.
work forever. When
Yeah.
you come back online, it'll like refresh your auth tokens and stuff like that to make sure that you still are a valid user. But as long as you're still a valid user, it'll authorize it.
Is there a way to control that? Because they only want 24 hours.
And your app could have some logic that just like calls sign out if it's been more than 24 hours. Like that.
Yeah.
We can talk afterwards. If you have
Okay.
specific use
There's-
cases.
Yeah, I couldn't actually get
Oh,
that
that
to
didn't
work.
Oh, I think it should. Yeah.
Intermittent I could, but not more than.
Okay, let's try.
And there's a site, firebase.google.com/support. If you go there to file feature requests and all that kind of thing, then I think the explicit logout scenario is probably the best option, but it is a bit of a hack, right? If you want, you know.
I think I had another issue. It was more in the calculation of like subscription in the analytics, how it calculates revenue for subscription.
Okay.
Doing yearly subscription, then it kind of goes it all into the same month. But the subscription actually should be over
Okay.
a 12-month period and stuff. But I didn't know where to report it, so.
Yeah, firebase.google.com/support.
Do my
Yeah.
spreadsheets and figure out.
Or actually, if you could send me an email with like some screenshots or something like that, because that sounds like an interesting feature request or maybe a bug. So that not just Al Moroney at Google. So, yeah, in front here.
So I have a question about the predictions, but a little bit differently. So if you take Firebase and you produce a PWA application, mobile application, there's no, if you do a normal Android application, you can point somebody at the Play Store and say, search the Play Store for my app. You really can't do the equivalent with a PWA and a Firebase app. But what I would like to do is, or can I tune the app when it runs on your phone, the heuristics somehow figure out, okay, that you've used this a lot, and it will add itself to your home page. Is there any tuning that you can do to, because you may have an app which is an occasional app, a conference app, an ACM type app, or some other reason that people are not going to use very often, but you would like to install it on the phone.
Well, certainly not in Firebase, and not predictions. I'm not really a PWA person. Michael, would you know anything on that?
I'm not sure either yet.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is what I know what Android does is that, at least with Android 8, commonly used apps will appear at the top of the list, you know, to give some kind of filtering like that, a little bit of intelligence behind it. But, you know, Firebase isn't really designed for that kind of thing. And predictions is based on analytics of people using it so that you can figure out what they would do, but not push it up on a menu or anything like that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
At the back?
Is the cloud messaging reliant on the real-time database? The real-time database that this is based on format and the cloud messaging, right?
Yep, it's not reliant on it at all. It's a separate service.
So what the difference is like using both of those? Because I used the real-time database, but I'm not sure how cloud messaging could be in the real-time database.
Right, so the real-time database, it has like a persistent HTTP connection that it uses to give you like real-time updates on your client. The Firebase messaging is a completely separate infrastructure, which is just designed for sending notifications to connected devices. The idea behind those notifications is that if you think about it with a database, it's like if you are listening to a particular field, you'll get updates for that field. But notifications has to go much further than that. So for example, with notifications, you have a concept that we call topics. And so maybe you're building an application. The application I always like to use as an example is a public transport application. So if you're building one of them that gives public transport information for everywhere in the world, you only want it for the city that you're in right now. So say, for example, we're in Seattle right now and you want to receive public transport notifications of delays in service, that kind of thing. Then the idea is that you create something called a topic for Seattle public transport, and the user subscribes to that topic. And FCM, what it's smart enough to do is that when it sends a message to that topic, it'll only route that to users of that topic. That's one example. Another one's an analytics audience that I mentioned earlier on. Another one is like a specific version of an application. Another one is an audience that was, or a user group that was created by predictions, those kind of things. So it's a totally separate infrastructure because it has a separate use case from the real-time database. The real-time database is data for people updated in pseudo real-time, you know, who are interested in that piece of data because the code says, you know, give me this data set. So totally separate infrastructures.
And I would say the real-time database is for like while the app is active and you're using it, and cloud messaging is more while the app is shut down and not running, that you can push messages.
But most of the, like sometimes you can use that with iOS applications, and so Apple has its own push notification. So maybe if you use like the real-time database with the push notifications, that will give you the same functionality of cloud messaging. I'm not sure like if that's the same.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that with Cloud Functions. So for example, if somebody makes a change in the real-time database, there's a field that you're interested in and has been updated, that can trigger a Cloud Function to execute, and the Cloud Function can then send a notification using Cloud Messaging. You know, so that's a secondary update that you could get if you so wanted. But how the database does the real-time functionality is a separate infrastructure. Okay, over here on the right.
Yes, I have a question about how Firebase would be used in personal messaging. Okay. Like you mentioned that when one user goes offline from a tunnel and they use an internal database cache to cache what they're writing in or what they said, but didn't reach the other people, would it eventually overflow? What would happen if that occurs?
I mean, I assume, yeah, with the capacity of the phone, it could eventually overflow, but I don't know if we've ever encountered that, have we? Have we ever seen that?
Like, maybe if you're trying to like stream video and catching all the stream video or something, that message or maybe the picture.
Yeah.
It's like, you get to hundreds of, like, thousands of pictures on your phone.
I personally have never seen that crash ever happen in any app, and I've never had it reported. Doesn't mean that it couldn't happen, but I find that it's an unlikely scenario.
I think some apps warn that.
Yep. And there's no reason why you wouldn't do that. That's like an Android feature, that Android will send you a message saying that you've lost connectivity. So like if you're using the Firebase chat app and, you know, it can tell you, hey, Android or iOS could tell you, hey, you've lost connectivity, but you could still continue to have an experience, right? You could still send chat messages, you know, so that you don't break the experience in lost connectivity. But if you want to pause the application, then that's your choice. But that would be an Android service or an iOS service rather than something that Firebase does. So there was one at the front here.
So if you have some CRUD in your JSON, or you messed up some of your JSON for your Firebase app, what is the good way to go about debugging that? What do you guys use professionally? Do you use the Chrome Dev tools or some other sort of tools to help debug something which is quite complex?
Yeah. I mean, for me, typically, I just go into the Firebase console and inspect the data. So you do have a data inspector in the Firebase console that you use to, it's imagined like a tree structure, like a file directory structure. You can go through and inspect your data like that and take a look at it. You can also output your data from the console to a JSON file that you could then load into a professional tool if you so desired. But for me, all of the debugging I've ever had to do is I was able to do that directly in the console. Thanks. There was one at the back. So. Okay.
Yeah, our state is using the real-time database with no authentication. Like if you don't use any sort of authentication, like the real-time database will be safe access.
Yes, so unauthenticated users can access the real-time database. You can set up security rules about what they can and cannot access. But we also have the concept of, I'm trying to remember the term now, but people who aren't signed up yet, that you can, that's typically used for giving them a demo approach so that, you know, this much of your database, you want people to be able to see and access before they sign up and before they're authenticated, and then the whole thing once they are authenticated. what's the term, Michael? Just
Anonymous.
anonymous users, thank you. So there's the concept of anonymous authentication for that. Was there a question there? No, it's just scratching it. Okay, right at the back.
So does the authentication also include authorizations, like role-based access for troubles?
Yes, there are security rules in Firebase that provide that. So, and then various authenticated users can get different security rules. Time for one more? No? Okay, well, going.
I remember on Firestore, Stack Overflow, someone was wondering about geoqueries and when that would be available for Firestore.
I thought they were in there already, are they?
No, you can store geo points in Firestore, but there's not currently a query on them, but that'll come in.
Okay, so with that, I'd just like to say thank you everybody for coming. If you didn't get a Firebase book or a drink or some pizza, please help yourself on the way out, and appreciate everything. And any questions, Al Moroney at Google. Thank you.